Seeking stability after 7 leaders in 7 years. Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe consolidates his grip on power. But can he revive the world's third largest economy? And how will plans to revise Japan's pacifist post-war constitution resonate with regional neighbors? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mike Hanna. It's been an elusive goal in recent years, but Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's ruling coalition has set the stage for Japan's first stable government since 2006. Voters have handed his Liberal Democratic Party and its allies a majority in the upper chamber, consolidating an election victory in the lower house in December. It marks an end to what's been called a twisted parliament, in which no party was dominant, and that has hampered policy making and led to a string of revolving door leaders. But a low voter turnout suggests a wider dissatisfaction with the state of Japanese politics. While Abe's stated aim to revise a pacifist constitution, which says Japan forever renounces war, is causing concern at a time of tense territorial disputes. Well, Shinzo Abe has been speaking to the media.
The Japanese people have given us their strong support, and we're very grateful for that. Regarding our economic policy, we intend to continue with that policy as swiftly as possible. The twisted parliament has ended, and what's being asked of us now is that the LDP shows its strength and proceeds with its economic policies so that the Japanese people feel the benefit of that. In terms of the revision of the Constitution, we'll be negotiating that, but we will need to have more than 50% of the support of the Japanese people in order to change the Constitution. So we still need to work on this, and before that we'd like to create a stable political situation.
Well, let's bring in our guests. In Tokyo, Michael Cucek, a research associate at the MIT Center for International Studies. In Singapore, Rajiv Biswas, Senior Director and Asia-Pacific Chief Economist for IHS Global Insight. And joining us from our new center in Washington, D.C., Yuki Tatsumi, Senior Associate of the East Asia Program at the Stimson Center. Welcome to you all. Let's begin with Michael Cucek. All indications are of a runaway victory for Abe's Liberal Democratic Party. Is this the beginning of a stable period of governance?
Oh, certainly. That there is no question. There is no question about that at all. What has happened this evening basically has reinforced the message that was delivered in December of last year, that the people of Japan, not all of them, but at least a significant number, want to have some kind of predictable government. Even if it's not exactly the government that they fully want, nevertheless, a government that can take action and a government that has the ability to push legislation through the parliament, which has been the problem, the Diet, that issue has finally been resolved this evening.
Well, Yuki Tatsumi, do you think that we are going to see an upping of the policies that have been displayed in the recent months since Abe came to power, at least?
Well, I think it all depends on how this government, with this new election results, will handle their economic policy agenda. The public didn't give this victory to Abe and his government for its foreign policy and security policy agenda. They really want this government to revitalize its economy and put them back on a solid recovery path. So Abe government really needs to take action. Like Michael says, I very much agree. In a sense, this government kind of lost excuses that these, they cannot do this things and that because of twisted diets. So now public will be very much watching what type of concrete action is coming out of this government to improve their lives, frankly.
Well, Rajiv Biswas, I'd just like to pick up on that particular point. It does appear that the desire for a working economy would be uppermost in the minds of the Japanese voter. Would that be correct?
Absolutely. We've seen basically 2 lost decades in which the Japanese economy has stagnated. And Prime Minister Abe came in at the end of last year and has really created a new sense of dynamism with his 3 arrows policy. We've seen monetary stimulus, fiscal stimulus. But now with his electoral victory in the upper house, he can move forward with the structural reforms that are essential for sustaining the momentum of economic growth. And this is very crucial because Japan still faces enormous debt problems. The government debt to GDP ratio is very high. And to tackle that, he really needs to get economic growth stronger. And for that, structural reforms are essential.
Well, Rajiv Biswas, I just want to follow up on that. What structural reforms specifically, what are we looking at?
Basically, Japan still has a long way to go in terms of microeconomic reforms, improving participation rates for the workforce, particularly the female workforce, and also improving mobility of labor. A lot of further deregulation is needed in the services sector. And one of the things Prime Minister Abe is very keen to do is move forward with trade liberalization initiatives as well, particularly the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which he has viewed as one of the measures he can take, which will help to boost economic growth in the long term. So I think there's a raft of agenda items that he's planning to move forward with. Some of them may progress, some of them may not, because we've seen in the past that the Japanese political system is very slow to move on regulatory changes. But I think with this new sense of urgency that we're seeing in Japan, perhaps now is the time, with a bit more optimism for reform, we can see the economy at least moving forward somewhat and trying to get out of this long-term stagnation that it's sunk into. And we have to remember that it's also confronting a declining population, which adds to the problems, and that's also a severe challenge.
Well, Michael Cucek, we hear the intention of the government, we hear that they want these reforms, but with all things economic, some things that people think are good, others will regard as bad. Is all of what we understand the Abe government to be planning economically good, do you think, or regarded as good by most of the people?
Well, the previous guest just talked about deregulation, and there's probably a no more dirtier word in Japanese than that one, at least. For most of the population, deregulation is seen as basically surrendering to an international agenda of basically financial interests, whereby environmental or social policy goals get thrown out the window. So if whatever happens, they're not going to call it deregulation, they're not going to call it restructuring. And when you don't have the ability to use those words and you're trying to do economic reform, you're going to be doing things piecemeal, and it's not going to seem like there's any kind of plan or any kind of real goal. It's all going to be rather chaotic. And that's okay, because there doesn't have to be an election here for 3 years. The next House of Representatives election, the next House of Councilors election. So Mr. Abe has a tremendous amount of flexibility if he's willing to expend the political capital. And that's the question that should be on everyone's mind. Yes, there are things to do, and yes, there are ways of doing them, but it requires sacrifice, and sacrifice is hard. What's happened so far, the first 2 arrows of Abenomics, that's easy. Debase the currency, how hard is that? Or increase the budget, how hard is that? But restructure the economy, my goodness.
Well,
You're going to have to be willing to sacrifice some of your supporters.
Let's bring in Yuki Tatsumi on that particular issue. There we have a sense of political sacrifice needed. You've got to forget the support that brought you into power. Is this possible? Can he do it? Is he the type of leader who would?
I think that'll be the test for everyone to see whether Mr. Abe is really a changed man from his first time being in a prime minister's office in 2006. Michael is exactly right. I mean, first 2 hours of Abenomics were relatively easy things to do, and it's also very almost atmospheric. That really has little substance to it. Third arrow is going to be crucial, and then I think that's not only the public, but then also investors, and then also the business sector in Japan. Japan is carefully going to wait for, and this is where his real challenge is going to be. Take Trans-Pacific Partnership that our Singapore guest from Singapore talked about. This is a deeply divisive issue even within his own political party, let alone general public. This is going to be this alone can suck up a lot of his political capital that he's got. And his public approval rating is relatively high, which is 70%, but much of that could very quickly go away if he cannot send the message or package the reform package that needs to take place in a way that's that sustains the sense of urgency, but really convinces voters that at the end of those hard road, there will be a much better life for Japanese people. And he really hasn't even talked about getting his fiscal house in order. Japan's debt ratio is exceedingly high. And in order to cut that down, he really has to start talking about cutting back on some of the social services, some of the social safety net. That's very near and dear to the aging population that Japan has right now. So yes, I mean, this is going to take a lot of political will, and I think that is a big unknown right now.
Well, Rajiv Biswas, I mean, those particular issues, what kind of base does Shinzo Abe have to build his new economic strategy? We heard mention there of a public debt which is far, far, far greater than the gross national product. On one side, you've got 4% unemployment, but on the other side, you've got a process in which if you continue increasing government spending, which may be necessary to create the stimulus that he's talking about, you are at some stage going to run out of money. What kind of base does the country have at this stage?
Well, it does confront a very high level of government debt to GDP, the highest in the OECD, and there's been concerns that, could Japan be the next Greece? But I think there are ways to avoid that. That's what he's trying to do. And I think a key test will be whether the LDP now implement the sales tax that's due to come in, the hike in the sales tax from 5% to 8% next year, and then a further increase to 10% in 2015. And that will do a lot towards reducing the primary fiscal deficit and restoring at least some order to the fiscal finances of Japan. But of course, the structural reforms beyond that are very crucial, because that's what you need to lift the growth rate higher. And although on the one hand he's planning to raise the sales tax, on the other hand, there's also talk about reducing the corporate tax to make Japanese industry more competitive and, again, to create a sense of dynamism in Japanese industry. There's no doubt that there's been a huge surge of confidence in Japanese industry with the depreciation of the yen. Business confidence has improved remarkably in the space of just over 8 months. And there is a new sense of confidence in industry, but that now needs to be sustained with these structural reforms. And Japan needs to move into new strategic industries beyond just manufacturing and try to develop comparative advantage in new sectors that will create momentum in the economy.
Well, many challenges economically ahead, but let's look at a wider context here, and that is constitution. Japan's pacifist constitution prohibits the use of force except for self-defense. It was drafted by US occupation forces after Japan's defeat in World War II, and it has never been altered. Article 9 of the Constitution states, "The Japanese people forever renounce war as a sovereign right of the nation and the threat or use of force as a means of settling international disputes." The Constitution effectively forbids Japan from maintaining an army, navy or air force, referring instead to its armed forces as the Japan Self-Defense Forces. It's something that has long divided the nation.
If Abe manages to change the constitution, we will finally have the right to collective defense, and if an enemy attacks us, or attacks the US, for example, we will be able to defend ourselves on a fair basis, for the first time in our history.
Because of Article 9, Japan hasn't lost a single life in war after World War II. Also, due to Article 9, Japan hasn't killed a single man in war after World War II. And the country hasn't dispatched soldiers to other countries and has no weapons, and the Japanese are proud of that. They would lose this feeling without the article.
Well, all indications are that Abe will not get the two-thirds majority in the upper house that he would need to amend the Constitution. But Yuki Tatsumi in Washington, how much of a concern is it that he appears to be so set on amending this Constitution, and what kind of popular reaction is there to it?
Well, I think public has already spoken about this a little bit earlier this year. There's a public opinion poll that was taken, I think, end of April, beginning May time period, regarding this exact issue by all the major newspapers from all across the spectrum of political ideological bent. And Michael may be able to talk a little bit better than I am about this, because I'm only reading about it overseas. But from my reading, whichever the newspaper that conducted this poll on this exact issue on constitutional reform, public is still very hesitant to go across the bridge. And the part of that is this Constitution, including Article 9, has been so much integral part of Japan's post-World War II identity. And no one is basically what lies ahead after altering that. It's some very, very unfamiliar, unknown, and for Japanese public, quite scary territory. And I was reading at that time that, okay, so public has been pushing back a little bit, and I think after that public opinion poll in the spring, Prime Minister Abe stopped talking so much about this reform. So we just have to see how he wants to sequence this issue. Public wants him to work an economic agenda first, and whether enough political capital will be left for him to do this constitutional reform, whether he really wants to do it or not, whether the political environment allows him to go in that direction. To me, I think it's a little bit too early to make a call on that.
Well, Michael Cucek, is it about political environment, or is it about something that is clearly a deep-seated wish and desire of the Prime Minister?
In terms of polling, the NHK, the national broadcaster here, has been looking at this issue, and even in the most recent polls, the group that has the strongest feelings is the uncommitted. About 25% of the population is gung-ho about revising the Constitution. About 25% say no, and about 50% are looking left and right and saying, where should I go on this issue, and are not sure. So in terms of public support, it could suddenly switch over into Mr. Abe's favor. However, what he needed tonight was 100 seats for his party, the Nippon Ishin no Kai, the Japan Restoration Party, and the Your Party, Minna no To. They're not going to get anywhere near that. So the three parties that were preparing to offer revisions to the Constitution and were pretty much all together on the same page, they just don't have the votes in the House of Councilors, and so basically the constitutional revision question is off the agenda.
Well, Rajiv Biswas, the issue of that changing that constitution, as we heard, maybe off the table, if not off the Prime Minister's mind. But how much of a kind of impact does that have on the wider economic forum, the reaction, the economic interaction with other states, particularly neighbors to Japan? Is there a concern among those states that the Prime Minister is even thinking of adopting a more, foreign policy-wise, aggressive constitution?
I certainly think that could play out. Given the current state of relations over the disputed island territory between China and Japan, that could just be another move that aggravates China again. But I think what Japan really needs to do is to address the issue of modernizing its self-defense forces rather than going down this road, which to me leads nowhere, of trying to change the constitution. What is urgently needed is to upgrade their defense capability, and that's a legitimate issue for him to pursue, and of course he does intend to do that. But that's all about restoring growth, it's all about improving the fiscal position, So it all comes back to the economy in the end, whether Japan can, modernize its armed forces sufficiently to keep up with the regional neighborhood, if you like.
Well, we've had some strong reaction on Facebook. Karukaba Jeremy says, I think Japan's policy of non-violence is a way of showing the world that peace and harmony is all we need. And Tomoko Bano wants to keep our pacifist constitution. It might be drawn up by the USA, but it's taken root into our spirit. But Rahat Khan tells us Japan should change the constitution, but they should exercise restraint as much as possible. Japan should do it for the sake of containment, which is, I think, essential in the present context of the world. And Napsia Wansale adds, the acquisition of better military assets could act as a deterrent to outside military threats, and Japan would be better equipped to defend its sovereignty and interests. Well, this last point about Japanese sovereignty, Yuki Tatsumi, there is an element, it appears, where this is connected to an economic independence, the need, the desire, the stated wish of the Prime Minister to create a Japan that is independent of the rest of the world, that defines its own policies. And here we have a linkage perhaps between the need for a new indigenous economic system and items like changing the constitution. Is there an element of sovereignty that binds all of this?
I think sovereignty questions comes in very strongly in its relations with Japan's immediate neighbors, China and Korea, and to a certain extent, not as much, but with Russia. Japan has territorial disputes with all the three countries. Whether Japan's official government position to acknowledging or not is another matter. Sovereignty really comes into the question, but I do think that when Mr. Abe talks too much about independent Japan, indigenous economy, indigenous defense capability, it almost sounds like isolationist, and that is a very dangerous rhetoric that everybody should be concerned about, and first and foremost, Japanese public should be very concerned about that. That type of model, frankly, is not sustainable in this 21st century interaction amongst the states.
Well, Michael Cucek, if I may go to you, sorry, Yuki Tatsumi, but Michael Cucek, if I may just go to you on your response to that.
We have to remember that Shinzo Abe and the LDP were running for this election. They had to appeal to their base. And throughout this year, yes, there have been these disturbing slips, plans to talk about revising what's called the Kono Statement, which is regarding Japan's sexual slavery system in the pre-1945 era, or the Murayama Statement, which was an apology for what happened in World War II. But then we saw retreats on these proposals, and we have to think that maybe there was just some way of, they were trying to make points so to tell the base, look, we're still with you, but then pull back, because pulling back is really in Japan's national interest. So while we should be careful about what Abe Shinzo says, he does have a constituency in a revisionist right wing here, whom he has to at least throw red meat every once in a while.
Well, to go to you very quickly, Rajiv Biswas, throwing red meat to a constituency, are there going to be economic sacrifices in that?
Well, I think there needs to be significant economic sacrifices to get themselves out of this fiscal pit that they've dug for themselves in the last 20 years. But I think one area that they need to accelerate their spending is on the defense side, to modernize their capability and to maintain their ability to defend sovereignty where necessary.
Well, at that particular point, Rajiv Biswas, thank you so much indeed. That issue of sovereignty, modernizing a defense force, all linked. My thanks to our guests, Michael Cucek, Rajiv Biswas, and Yuki Tatsumi. A reminder, you can find this program and many others at aljazeera.com. Just follow the link for shows, and why not leave us your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. I'm Mike Hanna. Thanks for watching. Goodbye for now.